Hey folks, Steve here with another Dark Valley video. This is turn 16, and we are entering into a muddy season, or a muddy month of October here in 1942. Now, like in the last video, in order to save some time for you watching, I've taken care of the reinforcement in the replacement phase, the airbase phase, and the strategic movement phase. So you will notice, if you were just watching another video or had a good idea where things were at the end of the last turn, I ended up railing some units around to kind of help cover the path here for both sides. The Russians moved some guys down some rail lines. The Germans railed what they could. And there are movements kind of all along the way through here, adjustments with the strategic movement that we could do. I pulled one of the Axis air bases down to here because we're going to need more support here, I think. As the winter sets in and the offensive capability of the Soviets increases, we're going to need additional air cover to deal with the onslaught that is to come. At least that's what I expect. Now, we still have an air down over here. I put it in the city that we recently took via isolation at the end of last turn. That is to help cover any other engagements we have around our Voronezh pocket, and then our last air base is still in Rostov, covering this whole area around here basically with its range, and that will have to do for the time being. We did have a withdrawal this turn, so we had to pull off a motorized infantry division, but the reinforcements or the replacements for the Axis led to a few infantry divisions coming on the board. A lot of our corps have been pumped up to full strength, but you know, things are tenuous here. For the Soviets, obviously, they were playing and adding some stuff to the board, and in particular, I have to make a couple of corrections from last video to call out here. So one is there's this case here, and I'm going to zoom in so you can kind of see. I can't, well, if I zoom out, I can get both on here. So you'll see this unit and this unit here are Guard mechanized corps. So what was supposed to happen was when the Guard corps came on, and it came on with a regular one, the regular one is like immediately replaced. I don't have to wait a turn to replace him. And so it sort of is a weird situation where I think sometimes like counters are there that will never be used, but I guess they're in there to avoid having a bunch of weird extra rule cases. So there's some counters that are just never going to touch the map. They're there purely for one part of a recipe to bring in Guard units. It's kind of odd. So I don't know. It worked out. It worked out fine. So now those units are Guard units, and that's going to help the Soviets out. You can start to see the color of the splash of red starting to show up on the board, and that will only increase because as I look at the rest of the baggies of Soviet units, there's a lot more red than brown. So this is going to become a truly red army over time here. So the other thing that I need to correct is down here in the Caucasus, where I don't know if I was getting overly excited or what, but the Soviets can get supply off these military roads down here, which means all these guys over here were actually in supply the last time we checked supply for logistics. And so I've corrected that, and I've made them in supply. The Axis units are still a little bit more in trouble due to the way the depot moved after logistics and whatnot, but I've corrected that. So just a couple of things that need to be corrected. Those are done. So now we're going to get into the action phase because I took care of everything else. And this turn is going to be probably a tough turn for the Axis. I've realized I have probably overextended myself trying to collapse this Voronezh pocket, and we're going to get punished for it. That's probably what's going to happen. So let's take a look at the situation, right? In the north, things are relatively stable. I'm trying to make a push to close this off and shorten the line a little bit. I'm just not making a huge amount of headway. There's actually a decent number of Soviet forces there that at this point, to pull them off, would take too much effort. So they're going to be there, and when the situation starts to collapse for the Axis down the road, those guys will be able to do something. In the center, the Soviets are doing pretty well. They're starting to push back the Axis and may even have some encirclements of their own forged here before too long. And if they're able to do that, then, well, it's going to get a whole lot harder for the Axis even then. So you can kind of see there's this salient that, if can be collapsed, is going to cause a lot of problems for the Axis. They're going to have a hard time fixing that. You know, if that falls apart for them, Army Group Center is gone, and the whole weight of the Axis line is shattered in a lot of ways. Over in Voronezh, obviously, we've got kind of a thinning line here, and it's because we've got so much tied up trying to collapse this this pocket that keeps getting little supply lines opened up every time that a logistics chit comes up. And the Soviets have so far been kind of lucky in that way, where they've been able to get units where they need to be, keep them from being totally isolated. I think I ended up forgetting to flip one marker here. There we go. So, yeah, we're just having trouble finishing it off, and now with the seasons changing, we may not be able to finish closing this pocket off. So this is going to be where a lot of action is, I think, this turn. It's really going to determine a lot. And then from Saratov and Stalingrad's angle, we have guys coming out of the cities. They're going to be forming, you can start to just see it now, a line that's going to stretch from like here down and then across around this river somewhere. And we have a really strong guard army in front of Stalingrad. That's going to be tough to deal with. And on the offensive, that unit has 14 combat factors by itself. That's going to put the hurt on anything it fights, for sure. And so, you know, you start to see the Axis are also trying to meet to where the line's going to be. If they can make use of the river, they'll certainly try to. And then down here, you know, we basically are going to have trouble getting into the Caucasus at this point. You know, I made the decision to send Panzer Group, 1st Panzer Group down south rather than go for Stalingrad, because I wanted to get around Rostov and get some of this area cleaned out. Now it's looking like, just due to the supply situation, I'm going to have a hard time doing that. I'm going to have to really get, I don't know, I'm going to have to figure something out, or pull back a little bit around Rostov and the rivers and hope that we can hold there. I really was hoping to get farther in this region, but it's just not happening. So that's where things are at. This turn, and the chit recipe is the same as last turn. So we have Stavka, which I do have a Stavka reserve. I've placed 3 tank corps in the Stavka reserve, and so that's going to be a fast reaction force. Basically, we'll play Stavka this turn for real. The Soviets have kind of laid off using it, but here I think we're reaching a critical point. And so I had rebuilt some tank corps, I put them right into the reserve. Our mobile tank reserve will jump into action on the Soviet side, depending on how the first couple of chits go. And basically I'll have them, you know, go where they need to go. If they need to stop the Voronezh pocket from collapsing, they'll do that. If they need to pop somewhere and leap across some rivers to formulate a deeper line in the Axis territory, they'll look to do that. But we'll see what happens. Because otherwise, they're just stuck with a move and the combat Zhukov again. Again, the combat Zhukov can be valuable where Zhukov is, but there's a whole lot of places that he's not. So we'll see what happens. The Axis is still stuck with a normal move, normal combat, and 1 Panzer. I've chosen the 2nd Panzer Army Group. That activation, or that HQ, is supporting the Voronezh pocket sector of the front lines, and I think that's got to be the one we activate, because that's really, it seems to me this is the critical point in the scenario for me, or in the war, in the campaign game right now, because if the Voronezh pocket turns into a disaster for the Axis, we will have repeated Stalingrad in terms of disaster level in a completely different place, and we'll be in real trouble after that. So it's important that the Axis still have operational action there beyond the normal stuff to try to make the best of this situation. It was looking really good, but weather's going to be a pain for us. Now there is one thing that is different this turn compared to last turn. Well, a couple different things actually. So you can see game turn, the initiative is that red triangle. So the Soviets actually have the initiative. So they will pick their first chit. They will get to go first. And then in addition to that, you can see the box, the turn box is brown. That means we are in mud, which means that our mechanized forces are going to have a much harder time moving. Zocs are going to start disappearing. And so things are going to get a little crazy here. I got to make sure I don't forget about the mud rules. I really got to take a look at and make sure I pay attention to the weather chart, which is here. You can see in mud weather, -2 movement points to all mech and motor units, Axis mech and motor units, -1 to all other units, so that'd be -1 to Soviet mechanized units. German mechanized units have no Zoc, no forced march allowed, airborne corps may not drop or transport, air bombardment's not as good, and no mechanized Zocs in swamp. So, yeah, things are looking rough. Ted Racer had messaged me and had reminded me that from here on out into the winter, things are going to be just rough in general for the Axis. And if they can maybe if they can survive through this winter, which they're going to have a tough time doing that. Maybe we can try to see some sort of offensive activity in the summer of '43. But gosh, we're going to have to withstand a lot of pain to come. It's also worth looking at, just from a strategic standpoint, that if we look at the action chit availability, the recipe list, as I'm calling it. So starting next month in November, which would be, that might be the last turn of, that might be the last turn if we were just playing the scenario and not the full campaign game. November 1942, we get same thing, move, combat, 1 Panzer Army. Well, the Soviets are going to get Stavka, a move, combat Zhukov, combat Stavka, and deep battle. And I'll put it this way. That's a lot of combat activations, because the deep battle chit is basically very similar to like a Panzer activation chit. I'll put it that way. We'll cover it next turn in the next video in more depth. But basically, once the deep battle chit starts coming into play, the Soviets' offensive capability is going to start to ramp up. So we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to deal with that through the winter to some degree. As I look ahead, December's the exact same recipe for the Soviets. It's a little different for the Axis. And then, all through the early part of '43, things will start to slow down. So the Soviets are basically going to have 2 to 3 or 4 turns of strong capability here. And if they can make the right cracks in the Axis line, we could be looking at a disaster. So what the Soviet player, or the Soviet side of my brain, needs to decide now is what will go in the cup and what will go into the first initiative activation. I think right now, to me, the most important thing is probably movement. And I said this in the last video. I think I have a predisposition to use movement as the initiative, mostly because that's the opportunity to get guys situated to actually take action later. If we were to do something else like combat, I'm not sure all of the combats I would care about would necessarily be able to happen. And what I really need to do is move. If I move before the Axis moves, I can ensure that the Voronezh pocket will not be closed off, I think. That's my thinking. And it will allow me to get some of the Soviet forces that are a little out of whack in line for the new line that's forming in the Don Basin area. And then, sort of on top of that, the Soviets can get in front of or can take the right positions as it relates to the rivers in that area. So I think they're going to go with move. So I'll go ahead and put that on the chit pull track, and I will take Combat Zhukov, Logistics, and the rest of these guys in the cup. Stavka will, of course, go in the available chits box for the Soviets, and we will go from there. I will take care of the Soviet movement here, and I'm going to try to get that glare off the screen. Here we go, that should work. We'll be looking at it this way for a while, I think. This is like the great transition to pro-Soviet minded Steve. I will complete the movement for the Soviets, and then we will come back and start pulling from the cup. Okay, well, I couldn't quite move units over to the north of the Voronezh pocket as much as I thought I could, but I've made some improvements there, and you can see via moving units west, I've now sort of created that line. Now, there's something, if you watch closely, you might say, oh, Stalingrad's in danger. Not really. So this is the only guy that could get to it, and he can't. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8, and they won't get there, and he's not in range of the not in range of the HQ for a second activation, so he's just not going to make it, and he's going to put himself way out of supply, and then the next set of Soviet reinforcements are going to plop right in front of him. So that's why there's a lack of Zocs in this thin line right now, but there aren't any motorized units to fear much of here, and a lot of those guys are now down here, where you can see I've now started to create an actual line around this area. So there's a bit of dead space in terms of rail. Everything's going to kind of be around this curvature, and that may be where it just ends up, where the axis goes into defense mode. But yeah, so nothing too crazy in terms of movement. I just did the best that I could to make the situation as good as I could. What I did do is I moved Zhukov up a little bit. So I was going to move Stavka, but I think where Stavka is right now is good enough. Yeah, is good enough, and then when we put in our reserves, they will be able to activate and go do stuff. What will matter next turn more is where's the Stavka HQ, because we're going to have the combat Stavka, and we could either do double activations with Zhukov and Stavka, I think, or we spread them out and have multiple combat areas. But you can see where Zhukov is now. He can actually, for the units that are in range of him, actually goes out pretty far where I've placed him now. So we'll have a pretty, I'm maximizing the units that can be within his range for combat. Now a lot of armies are going to activate when he activates, and it's going to put a big hurt on the axis, I think. So, with all that said, we're going to go to the cup. Again, somewhat limited stuff in the cup at this point. Now I need to decide, can I try to do Stavka now? I think I can use it after the initiative chit. If I did, what would I do? I would probably close up, I would probably close up the, I would probably close up the Stavka pocket, or create the line for that, and I think I might just do that now. I believe I can do it. Let me double check here in the rules. Yeah, so I think I can do it now. So I'm probably not going to be able to activate these guys for combat, but I don't think I really want them to either. What I'm going to do is, they're going to pop. Well, stacking is going to be a slight problem. I guess I would, knowing I would have done this, I might have moved this guy 1, 2, 3, 4 out. All these guys pop in Tula. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're in range. They can activate for movement 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this would be 7, 8. I guess I would, let's see, could he get there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. See, that's the problem. Well, okay. So he can't quite get to where I might have wanted him to be, which is to keep that from untangling. You guys can't even see it. Sorry about that. So here, right north of that Panzer division is some forested space. I would have wanted to get over there because we need to plug that hole, because that's an opportunity for the Axis to pop out of there, but there's only so much damage they could do if they do it. So I think for what needs to have happened here, this is sufficient. I can't combat with those guys, but now we've made some headway here. So now we're going to go to the Chit Cup, and let's see what we get. And I pull the Axis move. Now there won't be a whole lot of movement that will really matter too much here, but what the Axis will want to do is move to set up the next series of combats that will be coming. So from here on out, movement is now over for the turn. The only thing left are going to be combats, not counting, I guess, the additional Panzer activation that may have movement. So, yeah, it's going to be setting up those attacks. I'm going to take myself off camera. I'll take care of the Axis moves, and then we'll be back. Okay, well, not to be outdone, the Axis have spent their move consolidating their lines and basically attempting to construct a defensive posture here, and whew, things are going to get hairy here, I'm sure, very quickly. So I pulled back. You know, I've maintained my position across the Kerch Straits here, but I pulled back away from what was developing here. I've still got a guy that's a little out to sea a bit, and that could come back to bite him, but I've sort of created now a line that goes like so all the way up to the Voronezh pocket. And what I've done is, due to the lack of some of the Zocs in the area, because a lot of those Soviet units just simply don't have Zocs, I've moved units in to basically make it so that even if these guys can get away or get supply, Voronezh will not, and Voronezh will finally collapse after this turn, or should. That's my expectation at this point. So we'll have to see how that goes, but that's where that's what's up, I think. So yes, there you have it. That's where we're at. That's all we need to worry about, I guess. I think there was like one other move I was thinking about making here. I think it was going to be something like this. These guys can't go anywhere because there's Zocs in the way. Yeah. Now, even though there are the motorized, the mechanized Zocs don't work in mud, a lot of it's my infantry Zocs that are keeping a lot of these guys holed up. So that's kind of an important distinction that I need to make as I go through this and go through the turn. Yeah, mechanized units have no Zoc, but infantry does, so that will be the important thing. again, this is the Axis trying to set up something to defend itself a little bit better here, and just in terms of operation. Now we're going to go to the Chit Cup. Now the only thing the Soviets have left is their own combat Zhukov. The Axis, if they get theirs first, might actually be able to do some damage here. I think the Axis probably wants... oh, dang it, I forgot to move these guys. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that guy's screwed. I'm going to lose. There's this out of supply motorized infantry that I'm going to lose here way down in the Caucasus. I forgot to move a couple guys due to the out of supply markers. But okay, so I think logistics is what the Axis would probably want to come up next, but we'll see what we get. All right, and we get logistics. Okay, well, there you go. Axis feels good about that. So, I could probably do this even on camera, right? So these guys are isolated, 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 isolated. Isolated. Let's see, no mechanized Zoc. So 1, 2, 3, 4, yep, so he's in supply right now. He's in supply right now. He's in supply right now. Same, and same. Okay, so you can see now the impact of the lack of mechanized Zocs really matter here. So I'm able to close off Voronezh, great, and now I've got just this kerfuffle over here of units that are kind of plopping all over the place. But again, the lack of motorized Zocs means we couldn't cut off some of the supply lines that were at risk. And honestly, there's there's a lot of risk that's at play right now for the Axis in this area. But at the very least, we're going to finish off, very likely finish off Voronezh. Voronezh, I don't know how to say that right, which will at least get us another victory point, and then, you know, we can see about reconfiguring the line. The line will be shorter, and we can see what else is going on. Okay, and I think everything else, oh, okay, and these guys down here are in supply again. You know, they're not projecting Zocs. And this guy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, he is actually in supply again, amazingly enough. Okay. So basically, the only thing on the board that has supply issues is the Voronezh pocket. All the guys down here actually are fine for the moment. And everywhere else is in some wild situation where units are all over the place. Okay, so we're going to go back to the cup, and we will see what we get. And we pull the 2nd Panzer. Okay. I'm going to have to think through what's going to happen here, because the 2nd Panzer HQ can really only activate so many units right now. But those units could be used to maybe put the hurt on some units. I'm not sure. We could even look to collapse the pocket down there even faster if we wanted to. But we can only activate so many units. So I'm going to take care of that. You got to remember, so the HQ is like right here at the tip of my finger. It has a range of 3, so units within 3 hexes. That's really only a handful over here, not this whole section of units. So I'll take care of that, and then we will come back to the cup. Only things left are the combats, Axis combat or combat Zhukov. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so I opted to use this activation to pull units back as the Axis, and what I did is I basically pulled the HQ to safety, reclined the units back a little bit. You can see this funny line of where guys were at. and I'm giving up some space, but I really need to consolidate the situation. But at least what I'm doing is I'm basically making it impossible to save Voronezh at this point. Voronezh. They are going to go away. We're going to get Voronezh, and then we can seek to reinforce the eastern line in the Don region, and I'm calling it the Don region. I don't know if that's really appropriate, but the areas west of Stalingrad and between Kharkov and Stalingrad. I don't know what you call that area, if that's still the Don Basin or not. It might not be. So that's what we did. We didn't do any combat, because the only units that could do combat after movement would be the mechanized units, and I don't see really where there's a great place to do a combat. I mean, there's like, we could attack some of these isolated units, but they're going nowhere. There's nothing they can do. There's no use rolling a die and have a potential step loss when we can simply just sit and watch these guys evaporate. So we're going to go to the cup, and it's going to be combat either way. It doesn't really matter whose combat goes first. I'm not sure, but we'll find out what happens here. And we got our chit, and it is Axis combat. All right, well, with Axis combat, we have some options here, right? There's a couple of places along the line where we could entertain the idea of some sort of attack. We could try to smush that guy right now. The thing is, he's in supply. He had supply before the logistics chit, or as the logistics chit came up, and even though he's completely surrounded, he's fine. But if we force him to retreat, he goes poof, and I think it might be a good idea just to get rid of him now. So that's a possibility. We could see if we could collapse anything here, but again, I don't see the point. Otherwise, it's going to be all about what's happening between, like, right here and right here. All this is really important right now. So the Axis will have to figure out what they want to do. I will take myself off recording. We will work out those combats, and then I will come back, and we will talk through it. I'm going to go ahead and just pull the Combat Zhukov chit out now and place it. We know it's going to be next. But I'll make sure to come back on camera and show you the results of the Axis combat, and then we'll worry about the final combat and do the rest of the turn processing. So we'll be right back. Okay, so we were able to eliminate that unit that was surrounded with the DR result. It couldn't retreat anywhere, so it went poof. We made a couple other of attacks. Over in this region, you can see the line's been adjusted a little bit. Still maintaining our pocket. Up here, we did an attack on the spearhead. And we managed to reduce, it was a BL1, so we got rid of one German infantry division that was weak, and we planked the assault army, so we at least knocked some combat points away. Because what's going to happen is Zhukov's going to activate, and they're going to look to rip these guys up. So we did a spoiling attack, I'll call it. And I don't know, I mean, it was reasonably effective, I guess, and just the fact that we blunted them a little bit, but it might not have been enough, and we might see the loss of that that German unit. I'm not sure. We'll see. We did have a slight little advancement here because I did not get the units exactly where I wanted them to be because of the movement. I couldn't get this reduced core army over here. So they've advanced actually here, and they're projecting some Zocs in the area. So while this salient here isn't in total danger, they are going to be in some trouble and may need to do something about that. Though I don't think there's any combat they could do right now that could rectify the situation. So amazingly, in the north, there is a possibility of some goodness for the Axis, and we'll see how that goes. So now we're just going to have Combat Zhukov. So like in the past, I'll do a quick check down the line and see if there are any attacks worth doing. The problem is, again, because they're being, they would be attacking as if out of supply. That's a -2, and I can't understate. I can't state this enough. That -2 is very critical. The -2 is probably more important than odd shifts, honestly, because it makes many attacks for the Soviets what would be, even 3-1. even 3-1 becomes useless because it's -2. The best you could get is a retreat, but you also have a decent chance of having yourself attrited, or an attacker takes a loss, and basically anything along the line like that, you're just not getting anywhere. So okay, I'm going to take us off camera one more time. I'll take care of the Soviet combat, and when we return, we'll finish out the turn. Well, I gotta say, that was very bad rolling for the Soviets. I took a chance and attacked down here that would cause a disruption and push back the Axis and help kind of overextend them, and I rolled abysmally and caused an attacker loss. Over here, I got a no result trying to push back near the supply depot over here. That didn't do enough. Same thing with some attacks down here. That didn't do enough. And finally, up here, we made an attack on that unit that is keeping that unit deep in the salient in supply, and all I could get was a BL1. And finally, a pretty massive attack on that unit ended up with a no result. So all this gusto for the Soviet attack, and it didn't really go anywhere, which is really too bad for them. This would have been a pretty key moment to knock some heads off, but well, they've still got a few more turns to do that, so we'll see how it goes. It might be, it might be a problem for them before long. Okay, so that is the end of all the normal actions for the turn. So we will very quickly run our way through the remainder of the turn. So we have the attrition phase, Axis Depot, advance. I'm not sure any of the depots really want to advance. There's probably one here that would be willing to move forward, so we'll just roll for it. I rolled a 1, which in mud is 2 hexes, so we'll simply take care of that and move 2 hexes. Everyone should still be in supply just fine with that being the case. And yeah, I don't see any reason to move any of the other supply depots at the moment. Yeah, just no reason to. Okay, German air supply segment, no need, and then attrition. And as we discussed, the only thing that's going to happen here is we're going to have these guys removed. So there's an army, rifle division, cavalry corps, guard cavalry corps, another army, another army, tank brigade, tank corps, rifle division, another rifle division, and an army. So several armies, some tank corps, and I believe this will switch over even now to Axis control. So we're now at 35 victory points. I'll put the blue marker here to denote that. So finally, we took Voronezh. We're at 35 victory points. Now, to win, I think, what is it? Automatic victory is like 38, something like that. Yeah, it would be 38. Now, do I actually think I'll get 38 victory points anytime soon? No. So this is probably high tide for the Axis at this point. If we were going to try to win outright, what would be the cities, or the victory point cities that we could take? I think Krasnodar is out. It now has a decent defense and could keep growing as needed. I think Stalingrad's unlikely. Saratov is unlikely. Tula, maybe. If we can knock some stuff loose and move up enough, we could grab Tula. I think the only thing right now, it's like, hey, if you're going to win, here's how you would do it, would be Tula. If somehow we've got all the way up here, Moscow, and then we went all the way up to Kalinin or something like that. That would be how we get those remaining 3, but I just don't see that happening. Very unlikely. Stalingrad's not that far away, but holding Stalingrad would be difficult. We'd have to time it just right. So yeah, this is very likely high tide for the Axis. Everything from here on out will probably be them on the defensive, though in 43 they are going to get initiative in the spring-summer time frame. And as if I look at the 43 activation chit, yeah, I mean they're going to have some operational capability. So if we can survive the winter, we can make a play maybe at a couple of places. But I just don't know how well that will work. I think the important thing is now we have these units freed up, and they can come down here and support this line, or they can kind of help. You know, there's a couple of different things I could do with these guys, but that was a pretty big deal to get that cleared out. And now we just got to keep pushing, right? So, okay, that was turn 16 of the game. And next turn, we're going to see a whole bunch of fun activity. And if we were just playing the campaign, or I'm sorry, the Fall Blau scenario, it would be the end of the scenario at the end of next turn, next video. But again, we're seeking to play this out as a campaign game, so we'll assess the situation then. But I think that's all we're going to do for today. So turn 16 is out. Turn 17 will be next, and next turn will be a mixed weather turn, so that might be a little bit of a relief for the Axis, and maybe they can do a few more fun things before the winter really sets in, but I doubt it. So, okay, there we go, guys. If you like this video, hit like. If you'd like to see more content like this, hit subscribe. I'm sure at this point, if you're this many videos in, you're watching every one, if you're watching them at all. And until next yeah, I'm tired. Until next time, guys, take care and keep gaming. We'll see you in the next one.